Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So today is a really special one for me because we finally finished the river and we can finally move on to bigger and better things. Uh, Part of the video I'll be working on the house that you see behind me. It won't be finished by the end, but honestly just the sheer amount of different things that I actually do in this video now that I'm not hyper fixated on that river is just a breath of fresh air to me. But without much further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the video. Alright, kicking off the first session post river. Um, so I think there for a little bit I wasn't exactly sure what to do with myself. Because I'd spent at least 15, maybe upwards of like 20 hours working on this river. And so it was like a real breath of fresh air. It was really relieving to be done with that because it was like getting so exhausting working on it. But then part of it was like, well, what do I do now? There's so many options, so many choices. What is the correct thing for me to start working on now? Um, but the first thing I do right here is I actually start looking for light hide. Um, so light hide is kind of frustrating compared to the other hide types. Uh, so currently in our world, we have like over 200 medium leather, which is just too much. And honestly, it doesn't really feel like there's a use for medium leather. Uh, but meanwhile, heavy leather, we're doing all right on heavy leather, but people are slowly working on upgrading their gear to adamantite, which uses heavy leather. So uh, the supply is running a little thin. But the one that's honestly been the worst throughout this entire playthrough has actually been light leather, because unlike animals that drop medium and heavy hide, animals that drop light leather don't really attack you. I think the fox is the only exception to that, but every single other type of animal that drops light hide doesn't attack you unless you attack it. And so a majority of the hide and leather that we've collected is as a result of bears and wolves and lions attacking us and us fighting back. So the light leather supply has always been way too low, and it remains to be, it's a problem to this day. And so here I had used every single repair kit that I had. And repair kits take light leather, so I had to go out and farm some light leather so I could make repair kits, because I believe I'm about to go and collect a bunch of shale for the continuing my city project. Actually, it looks like that might not have necessarily been my case. I might have decided to go out and get some adamantite instead. So what we just ran past right there was a friend's base that he's working on. So there are 4 of us that have played on the server so far. Obviously, I've played the most, and then the castle that we just went past, that belongs to the friend that has played the second most, with the other 2 having not even really played all that much until just a week ago. So to this day, one of the scarier parts of Zone 4 to me are those deep cracks. And a lot of times they'll have lava at the bottom of them as well. So I think what I'm doing right here is I'm trying to find a cave because I've always found more ores while inside of a cave, and so I was looking for it in Zone 4, but there really don't seem to be uh, openings to caves on the surface in Zone 4, with the only exception being volcanoes leading to dinosaurs. But at this point, I didn't really know too much about how to get to the dinosaurs. I had been trying to avoid them because I was waiting for my friends to hop on. But I was getting really frustrated because I kept looking and I just could never find a single cave entrance. Eventually, I discovered, came to the conclusion that there weren't any caves on the surface. So that little pig that almost pieced me up right there, I still get so disoriented when a little chicken or a pig comes at me just out of nowhere because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel like that should happen. Zone 4 is cool, and the Praetorians are definitely one of the more dangerous enemies. Unfortunately, the combat AIs definitely still need some work because after fighting them a few times, it was pretty easy to figure out a simple way to essentially like cheese them. So with the exception of that like dash attack that they choreograph for quite a while, they don't move forward very slow, and so you can almost just back up while firing arrows at them. And it makes it pretty simple. You can also just tower like what I'm doing right here. Um, I tried to get away from the towering cheese and actually fight enemies correctly. Uh, at this point, I don't even need the tower anymore because unless I get caught off guard or I'm not paying attention, it really is hard to die while fighting in this game. The backpack is a really cool addition to the game, and I like the ability to, slowly unlock more inventory space, essentially. However, I do sort of wish that the backpack would have items go into it on its own, instead of how it currently works, which is you have to manually put items into it. Uh, I mean, sometimes I forget I have a backpack, and I end up not taking as many things as I could, simply because I wasn't paying attention and forgot that I had an extra 9, or at this point 18 spaces in my backpack. So, as if right on cue for me saying, it's so hard to die in this game. Uh, those potion throwers are awful. they do way too much damage. Like genuinely, it is a little crazy how much damage that they do. So earlier I mentioned the cracks and how horrifying they can be, and as you can see, I'm running along here. I run into several sections where there's cracks down into the lava. Uh, Somehow, up to this point, I have avoided actually falling into the any of those cracks, but it's still like I just sprint and jump and will occasionally almost fall in, and one of these days it's going to happen. So I thought right there I had fought the potion thrower, but then I realized that was not a potion thrower. So luckily, used my bow, cheesed him just fine, and we made it through. So once again, I think I was a little confused and overwhelmed by where to start. So at this point, I knew I wanted to essentially build like a little village, maybe a city, something like that. And I had an idea of where I wanted to build it and where I wanted to start, but it was still just a little overwhelming actually pulling the trigger on continuing this city, this town, because the very first one was just a single building. It's like, who cares? And then the second one I threw on the other side of a river and built a bridge, and it's like, this is simple. But once you get to building 3, building 4, I feel like you actually have to start thinking about where these buildings are going to go in relation to each other. And so at this point, I'm looking at the 2 different builds that I've done so far and figuring out what my plans are for this third one. Um, so for all like 20 of you, there might be more at this point, but as of recording this, like 20 of you that watched my very first video in all of its cringe glory, um, you should kind of have some idea of how I'm building these. Um, but essentially, I like figured out the basics of how I like to build in this style, and then every single time I've built a building so far, I try and push that envelope and change things up. I try to make the buildings more interesting every single time and add some flair so that they aren't just cookie cutters. Like, they're all very much in the exact same style, but I try to keep that style fresh and interesting while also keeping everything, still in line with each other so that it all feels cohesive. So the main difference between the very first house, the one that I actually live out of, and the bigger house that's a tavern is the very first house that I built is just uh, it's 8 blocks wide at the foundation and 10 blocks long on the foundation, not including the stairs leading up. And so I was like, well, this one I know I want to make bigger because I want it to be a tavern of sorts. And so I built it 10 blocks wide on the foundation. And I realized that there were some problems with having done the foundation 10 wide because it made the building an odd number, and roofs in Hytale don't exactly work well on odd numbers. And so I switched it to an even number for that one in an attempt to iron some things out. Now, I learned that I kind of do like the flat portion of the roof occasionally that you get when you do use an odd number for those smaller bits of the house. But there are other times when it is nice to have it be an even number. But again, the main difference between the first house that I built and the tavern is that the first house was built on a foundation 8 blocks wide, and the tavern was built on a foundation of 10 blocks wide. And so with this one here, I knew I wanted to make another bigger one. The idea was a blacksmith's residence slash shop. And so I wanted it big enough to essentially function as a store of some sort on the first floor, and then I could eventually build out the interior to be the blacksmith's living quarters on the second floor. But again, I wanted to differentiate it, and so what I did this time was, rather than having the main portion of, like, the entrance to the house being on the larger section, whereas, you know, with the tavern it was built 10 wide and I had a section 8 wide coming off of it off to the side. Instead, I switched it around this time. I had the entrance to the house be on that 8 wide section, and then it fed into a section that had a foundation of 10 wide. So once again, I needed more rubble. Cold pebbles are really cool, and they're kind of necessary for the way that I like to texture the foundations of my builds. In the video where my very first video where I actually talk about how to build the houses, I don't go over the texturing of the foundations. That video was already longer and more long-winded than it needed to be, so I just didn't want to drag it on any longer. But essentially my thought process was I didn't like how flat it looked, and so I wanted to add some variation in there. So there's 3 blocks total that I used for the foundations. There's the shale cobble, that's the main one. It's the coolest in my opinion out of the 3 of those, and I like it the most. It's got this really nice blue color to it. Shale itself has more of like a blue-gray. It's a lot more desaturated, and so it doesn't quite fit super well with the shale cobble itself, and so you need some sort of like intermediate color that ties it together, and the cold pebbles have just a little bit of more, they have just a little bit more dark blue or a darker gray in there that pulls into it, because the shale itself is a little bit lighter than shale cobble, and so those cold pebbles bridge that gap and end up giving it a nice texture. But what I'll usually do is I put shale, just normal shale, down on the very bottom of the foundation, so the entire first ring is always shale, and then I'll stack up the shale in sort of a sort of random pattern, texturing it with a little bit less shale on the second layer, or only the occasional shale reaching that top 3rd layer. And then I'll sprinkle some cold pebbles mostly into where the shale was, but I'll also throw some cold pebbles completely surrounded by the shale cobble. And all in all, it comes out looking pretty nice. Now, this one's texturing in the foundation wasn't my best work. I've gotten better at it as time has gone on, I think. But you get the general idea. So, for those of you that didn't know, and I really should have been taking advantage of it here, I have every other time I've built in Hytale, but so specifically for stone slabs. For wooden slabs, you can't make wooden slabs a full block, but for stone slabs, you can. And oftentimes, stone slabs and their normal stone counterpart function a little bit differently in their textures. A little bit later on when I work on the road, I'll go more into that. But you can make a stone slab a full block by left clicking on it again. But it only uses a single slab, so you can get a full block out of just half a slab, which in Hytale, it's 2 slabs for every 1 block. And so in that way, you're actually getting twice as many blocks out of every single block. And so normally I take advantage of that when building up the foundations, but it seems like I forgot that until I got to the roof on this one. So one of my least favorite things in Hytale is how difficult it is to make those uh, wooden encased trestle walls that I use for my build. I love them. They are fantastic, and I'm so glad that they are in the game. But they require so much to actually craft. Like it's 2 clay and 1 white petal to make 1 smooth white clay, and then it's 1 smooth white clay and 2 hardwood planks to make 2 of the actual encased wooden trestle. And it is exhausting going out and getting hundreds of white petals, like 1,000 clay blocks, and chopping down several hardwood trees just to get enough of the block for a single house. Like, it's awful. I have like 10 houses that I still want to do. And what that means is I am going to have to essentially ransack the entire world for white petals and clay. And you know, as you can see, like I have to travel pretty far. Like almost the entire rest of this video is me searching for white petals just so I can actually like continue working on the house. Now I got pretty lucky in a lot of parts where I actually did find large patches of these white daisies, and so I was able to get a fairly sizable amount of white petals. But speaking as future Trash Panda here, this is not the last time I have gone looking for petals. So the like hundreds of white petals that I'm getting here, it I don't even know if it was enough for this build alone. Like I might have needed more to finish this build, let alone any other build after it. So you can see me here creating more of the smooth white clay. And then, like I said, it takes hardwood. So I was trying to make sure that I wasn't going to use my uh, oak wood logs, but in the end, I didn't have enough other hardwoods to actually um, build out all of the wooden trestles on their own. And so I did have to seal, well, no, I had more, I think I had more ash log out there, and so I was for the most part able to avoid using oak, but it did use some, it did pull it from the chest. So, like I've said before, I try to play around and do something different every single time. And so here I was trying to decide how I wanted to build things out in relation to the way I've built things out in the past, but how I also want to go about possibly making things different and unique. So the big thing I want to do on that back section and why I keep running forward is I'm wanting to kind of offset it. I don't want it to necessarily be in line with the front section that's coming into the house. I wanted to offset it just a little bit, um, but I was also trying to decide how wide I wanted that section to actually be. So this is always a satisfying section for me. Now, of course, it takes so many blocks to do, but it is so satisfying to actually build all of this out. And all of a sudden it goes from being a flat foundation with nothing on it to actually starting to look like a house. Um, and hopefully for those of you that remember what you saw at the intro of the video, that you're starting to kind of be able to see the house that you saw in that intro clip actually coming to life as you watch the video. Alright guys, well like I said at the very beginning of the video, I don't finish the house in this video, if you couldn't tell by the fact that we're right here at the end, so be sure to stick around next time when I do finish it. Alright, well thank you guys so much for watching. If you did like the video, please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to see me finish the house behind me, as well as all of the other builds that I do in this world, please hit that bell so you guys will be notified from my next video. Have a great day.